I was not okay. I tripped backwards, landing flat on the wet dirt path. I just couldn't take my eyes off the mine. I saw the reflecting eyes, even now. If I listened, and the wind turned the other way, I could hear them. Like me. All like me. I must have sat there for at least 20 minutes. I can't remember at what point they turned back. But it didn't matter. I'd never been that scared in my life, and my body was still trying to figure out how to think straight. This had been all kinds of fucked up, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. This is where we'd dropped the bodies, year after year, and now, somehow, they were waking up. Or had they been awake all along? It didn't make any sense. It never did. I heard someone clear their throat. I was up on my feet in the blink of an eye, ready to raise my handgun. I was covered in dirt, most of which had dried. I blinked away a drop of sweat, trying to focus.
Heard you had a passenger.
Officer Ken. I should have known. He'd heard about me and Robert down at the supermarket and called my bluff. How did you know?
Marley O'Donnell saw your car parked nearby, gave me a call, and I put 2 and 2 together.
Of course. The O'Donnells practically lived on their feet with 8 St. Bernards. They got out a lot.
You mind putting down the gun?
Officer Ken asked. I hadn't even noticed. It was up. We sat down on a large boulder overlooking the entrance to the old mineshaft. Ken was quiet. He could tell I'd seen something. Maybe what I'd seen was punishment enough for keeping him in the dark. I don't know what to think anymore, I said. The bodies... I've always been there, Ken. But I don't know how to deal with this. I don't even know what this is.
I've heard all kinds of stories over the years, nodded Ken. Most of it from drunks who try to get nasty images out of their heads, 1 bottle at a time. But some of those stories, well, they stick with you.
So what's that then? I said, pointing at the mine. What's in there? Really?
My dad told me our family have been doing this since the first Scandinavian settlers came here, Ken said. Down by the lake, they had a rockman during spring, when the stones around the lake kept their day warm all the way until the sunset. They knew the bodies would rise out of the lake. That's where the name of the lake came from, you know, Solsten, Sun Rock.
Ken looked back at the mine and shook his head.
They stuffed the bodies with sand and dumped them in the caves.
So what happened when they opened the mines?
There were never any mines, Ken chuckled. It was always a dumping ground.
So we're talking hundreds of years?
More. The natives used it even further back.
Hundreds of years? Thousands of dead?
Not dead, sighed Ken. They're bodies, but they're not dead.
What do you mean?
They get up. It takes time, but they do. If we chop them, the parts get up.
Wait. I looked back at the mine. I didn't understand. The numbers alone were staggering. There was no way there could be tens of thousands of bodies wandering around down there. Could it? How long do the mines stretch? I asked.
Not long. Deep, said Ken. They're deep. Real deep. And 9 times out of 10 the bodies just wander off and disappear. Out of sight, out of mind. It's like they forget there is an outside world.
They aren't out of sight anymore, Ken, I sighed. They're getting back up. They're at the ground level. I pointed at the entrance with my handgun. Maybe 20 feet in.
No shit.
None. Ken checked it out himself. He didn't have to go far to see the reflecting eyes looking out at him. He recoiled. Seeing someone else get the same fear of God in their eyes as I'd had calmed me somehow. I wasn't crazy. Ken, on the other hand, was freaking out. He walked around in circles for a few minutes, grumbling and thumbing his phone. Suddenly, he stepped back to me.
We gotta do something, he said. We gotta get rid of them. We can't have people standing guard here forever.
What do you...
Those fuckers are gonna come out,
Ken spat.
When we turn our backs, we're fucked. All of us. Just look at what they did to the smallies.
I nodded. I didn't know if he was right or not, but the thought of Henry accidentally stumbling over this place with his friends, finding themselves face to face with those things. No. I couldn't live with that. So, what are we going to do?
We're doing something, Ken said, and we need more people to do it.
Ken called in the O'Donnells and the Nicky sisters. It took them less than half an hour to get a tractor up the trail. They were armed to the teeth. Marley O'Donnell was pulling a trailer with 6 blue barrels along. It took me a few seconds to recognise them. It was a Smalley family gasoline reserve. I still couldn't believe they were gone. I kinda got lost among the chatter. Everyone was talking to everyone. People were checking the cave entrance, untying the barrels, loading their weapons. I got a box of handgun ammunition from Leslie Nicky, the younger sister. They were talking about taking the main corridor and about dumping the barrels down the collapsed hallway in the back. I was getting anxious. Never play with fire. I was pulled along when the crew stepped up to the mine entrance. I couldn't see any bright eyes looking back at me, so maybe whatever was in there had retreated. I didn't see Robert either. I couldn't help but wonder if he moved, or if someone had moved him. Either way, I wasn't looking forward to seeing him again. 2 by 2, we walked in. We left the barrels outside. We had to clear out the main corridor first. I ended up next to Leland O'Donnell, the patriarch of the family, an elderly gentleman with a soft spot for his kin. Friendly enough if you had a family of your own, but the man had no patience for anything more modern than a 56K dial-up modem. That went double for opinions.
You know why they end up in the lake? He whispered. Your dad ever told you?
No, they've always just been there.
The river Styx, he smiled. The many rivers of the world below. And there's a thing about rivers, you know. They all gotta end up somewhere.
Like a lake, I nodded. Or an ocean.
So every little river gotta bring them somewhere.
My thoughts were interrupted by a loud, reverberating bang. What surprised me most was that my body didn't even seem to react. It was as if I was already at peak stress. There was nowhere to go from there. And yet, my ears were screaming.
I think there are little rivers all over the world, said Leland, raising his voice, all the way from here to China.
That leaves a lot of questions, I smiled. Like, why can they jump so high? Am I going to end up in a lake somewhere someday too?
Clever, smiled Leland, but you're forgetting something. These people are already dead. They don't have the weight of the world weighing them down anymore. They can just drift off.
That's surprisingly literal.
Most laws of the old lands are literal, he smiled. They say there are things out there who can literally eat death. To them, we are nothing but wheat. And in there, those are the husks.
Eat death? What are you? Another series of loud bangs. Then silence. As we entered the first main hall, there were surprisingly few of them. Ken and the Nicky sisters had already dealt with 6 stragglers. Ken called up ahead for us to start rolling in the barrels. It took me and Marley O'Donnell 3 turns each to push them all in. Every few minutes, there was another shot. It seemed we had plenty of time, but I couldn't help but feel like I had to watch my feet. I had the uneasy feeling that just beneath my soles, something was moving. Something deathless and cruel. The husks that Leland O'Donnell talked about. When we'd finally rolled in all 6 barrels, the mine was still. Every step we took echoed unopposed. We were all alone, illuminating the moist walls and ripped trash bags with our flashlights.
There's still gunpowder down there, said Leland. A big enough fire and we ought to close this place down for good.
We started pouring out barrel after barrel of gasoline. We left a trail all the way out to the main entrance, cleared out, and lit it up. After a few minutes, we could hear the flames further in and smell the burning plastic. We all sat down in a half circle, just staring down the mine, in silence. We waited for a couple of hours. The fire just kept going. At one point, we felt something shift. Leland figured the fire had started breaking the supports on the lower levels. At one point, we could feel a small explosion. The tractor shifted, making an awkward metallic creak. Around lunchtime, the supports on the first level cracked. Within minutes, we could hear the corridors collapsing. It sounded so much like thunder that I imagined I'd heard it before. When the entrance finally collapsed, the smoke was as thick as oil. We all just stood there for a moment.
Nothing is getting out of there.
We decided we should check in later that night, just to make sure. However unlikely, we weren't going to half-ass this. If those things truly didn't die, we might just have been prolonging the inevitable. But I figured ashes would walk a whole lot slower than legs. The rest of my day was surprisingly normal. I took a shower, set the table, fell asleep on the couch right next to Danielle. The usual everyday ballet. When something this unnatural and impossible happens, it is so much easier to compartmentalize. It all felt like a dream. Danielle didn't even ask me about Robert. All I had to tell her was that I'd dealt with it. It wasn't until I crawled into bed that night that my mind caught up with me. As I lay awake, staring into the ceiling, I could almost taste the burning plastic. I could imagine Robert's glowing eyes looking down at me. There was a careful knock on the door. Before I could answer, Henry walked in. "Are you okay?" I whispered. Danielle was out cold. Henry nodded. "There's smoke in the backyard," he whispered back. "I think there's a fire." I rolled out of bed, stepped into the hallway, and checked the back window. Our backyard isn't big. We don't use it for much else but the occasional barbecue. There was an old tire swing from when Henry was younger, and that was pretty much it. The rest of the yard was just storage and maybe some day space. But now there was a thin pillar of smoke rising from the ground. A thought struck me. "Go wake Mum," I said. "Now!" Henry nodded, his eyes went wide, and he ran. I rushed to the bathroom and turned on the faucet. As I feared, the water was black. It smelled of ashes. The caves, they were upstream from the groundwater. I put on a pair of pants and hurried out to my car. I still had the handgun stashed there. As I got it and checked my ammunition, I could hear gunshots further down the street, pillars of smoke rising high above the rooftops. At least a dozen. "Dad!" Henry called from the front door. "There's someone in the backyard!" "Get your mum!" I called back. "Get in the house and lock the doors. Stay away from the windows." I rounded the corner to the backyard, ran past the grill, and noticed the same reflecting eyes I'd been dreading all day. Henry was right. There was someone in the backyard. One of them was just standing there, next to a smoking hole in the ground. Before we moved in, there had been a well on the property, but it had been filled in over a decade ago. This hadn't stopped the man standing in the backyard, though. For a few seconds, we just looked at one another, his eyes reflecting the light from the kitchen. I could barely see any details about him. He was slightly taller than me and had a strangely shaped head, but that was pretty much all I could tell. As he stepped closer, I raised my handgun. "Just go back down," I said. "Just turn back." "Can't go back," he wheezed. Can't go." The ground was discoloured with every step he took. Danielle's tulips had turned blue, and the grass had started to wilt. I took aim. "Can't," he repeated. "I can't." "Please," I pleaded. "Just, please." With an effortless move, he leapt into the air. I'd seen it before, 6 feet straight up, almost weightless. It looked so easy, someone without the weight of the world, as Leland had said. I could see it now. "Can't," the voice whispered as he came crashing down. I stepped aside as the body fell haplessly onto my grill, knocking it over and spilling charcoal all over the cobblestone. I snapped out of my indecisiveness. The world came rushing back to me as I raised my handgun. Only now did I recognize the man on the ground. It was the same pot-bellied man I'd seen my dad pull out of the lake almost 20 years ago. The same pale skin, sunken eyes, and thinning hair. To me, decades had passed, but this dead man was still the same. And now he was writhing on the ground, trying to regain his balance. He grunted with effort, his body stained with streaks of black. "Can't go," he wheezed. trying to get back up.
Can't.
I shot him 6 times and ran. I didn't even stop to check if I got him. I just had to go. The next few minutes are a blur. Danielle and Henry had hidden in the closet. I got in through the bathroom window, which they'd forgotten to lock. They were screaming. I screamed back. We had to get to the car. We had to go. We had to act. Danielle didn't understand. Henry was scared. My instincts forced me into a single-minded drive to protect my family and leave. I had nothing but pants on when we got into the car. It felt strange, stepping on the gas with no shoes on. I almost ran someone over as we pulled out of the driveway, breaking the speed limit as we passed by our neighbours. Someone was shooting. Someone else was screaming. Glass was breaking. Danielle was yelling at Henry to put on his seatbelt. She kept repeating it, trying to force him to listen. It felt like such a mundane thing to do, like brushing your hair while your room is on fire. Still, Henry did. I did as well. Danielle was just about to, when we clipped the edge of a car backing out of a side road. Collision. For a split second, it was all quiet. The silence grew louder until it felt like a blanket over my mind. My hands were numb, but I reached for Henry. I touched his knee, trying to see if he was okay. Danielle lay unconscious, her right arm broken in several places. Somehow the car was still running. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard Henry call out to me. I saw him point. There were people outside. Don't worry, I coughed. Just lock the doors. I stepped out in a haze, not even noticing I'd left my handgun behind. There were hundreds of them. They were marching up and down the streets, a mob on a midnight stroll. They were climbing in through windows, ripping open car doors, dragging people out into the street. 7 of them had gathered around me, 2 kids, 1 elderly woman, and 4 adults. I couldn't focus on their faces. I was pretty sure I had a concussion. Still, I couldn't help but notice how they never blinked. The reflection in their eyes never ceased, like stars. No, I sighed. Just not like this. Not you. I don't even... One of them circled around me, stepping up on the hood of the car. It seemed particularly interested in Danielle. I snapped at it. "Get the fuck away!" I screamed. Get away from her! I took a step too quickly and tripped over my own feet, falling shoulder first, into the pavement. The world was spinning. The stars above me seemed to move in strange patterns, aligning into constellations I'd never seen before. Then, Robert appeared. He might have been there all along, or just popped up out of thin air. It was impossible to tell. I was completely out of it. I fumbled with my hand, my fingertips brushing against his cold cheek. He was real. He was there. "I know where to go," he said. "I'm the only one who remembers." Where will you..." "Thank you," he said, "for bringing me home." I killed you! I shot you!" "Yes," he nodded. "You did." Someone ripped open the driver's side door. Henry was screaming. I'd never heard him scream like that before. I tried to protest. I fumbled with my arms, but I was powerless. I saw them pushing themselves into the car. I heard Henry struggle against the seatbelt. More glass breaking. Had I forgotten the child locks? I screamed until my throat was hoarse. I felt cold hands holding me down, covering my mouth. Hand after hand after hand, covering my face until the world went dark. It smelled like dirt, lake water, ashes. The last thing I remember from that night was the hands letting me go. I rolled onto my stomach. I saw them wander down the road in unison. Then, as effortlessly as ever, they ascended. Dead bodies lifted vertically into the night sky, full of impossible constellations. Puppets pulled up to join the puppeteer, their unceasing eyes reflecting the stars. Robert and his dad, side by side. The man got his glasses back. That night, the moon shone black. I can't explain it. It just did. The next morning, I didn't know what to do. The car was empty. Entire seats had been ripped out and left in the middle of the street. Further down the road, I found the bodies of the Nicky sisters. They'd had a last stand by the supermarket. The O'Donnells were just gone. Same with Officer Ken. It took me hours to even get my head in the space to call for help. People drove up from Aurora Falls. I was bandaged, and I remember someone asking questions I couldn't answer. After that, it was just a circus. I have to write this down. I have to put these words to paper. Someone has to know that what they're saying just isn't true. I was given my life as a thanks, not as a result of some crazy happenstance. They said it was an accident. Some fracking causing a massive natural gas leak. 12 dead, 19 missing. Except people don't fucking shoot at gas leaks. It doesn't pull people out of their cars. And I swear, there were a lot more bodies than 12. Just look at the pictures. The holes in the ground are still smoking to this day. You can see the wilting grass and the unnaturally blue flowers. Even in the newspapers. On Google fucking Maps. It's all there. I still see them sometimes. I can feel them. I look up at the sky, and I know that some of those stars are just eyes looking back down. One day, they will come for us. And when that happens, there will be no pretty words or cover-ups to change the fact that those cold hands will grasp us and bring us all down the river of the dead. One day, I'll awake on the shores of Solsten Lake, having left all the weight of the world behind. And they'll be there. We'll laugh, carefree and weightless. You'll see. You'll all see.